Hello there. You're in time for a very wonderful conversation this day. And as we conclude the year, as we look back at the year 2022, with lots of questions, answers, and comments and worries and, hope for the future or for the year 2023, as you might put it. We sit here to look back at the year 2022, look at the events of the year, the news, the headlining stories of the year. And you are watching Civic Space TV. My name is Lynn Komugisha. I host the Uganda Diaspora Show on Civic Space TV. And you can go to our social media platforms and, be part of almost all our conversations, because we are on every platform on social media at Civic Space TV. Just look us up and we are there. Now, joining me to look back at the year 2022 is Kidega Moses. Kidega Moses hosts the Citizen ChatShow and the Youth Roundtable that is here on Civic Space TV. We have Musiime Martin. He hosts community show and sometimes focus on Parliament. We also have Gloria Nabaye. I hope I've pronounced her name right. She hosts the women's show and focus on Parliament. Lady and gentlemen, I'm glad to have you as we look back at the year 2020. But before we can properly take our lenses back at the year 2022, what stood out for you? And allow me, ladies first.
Well, thank you. Welcome, viewers, to this show. For me, this year has been a roller coaster, but what stood out for me, and in a grim way, was the fire that gutted the Salama School for the Blind, where we lost 12 children.
Yes.
And it was a reality that we didn't stop to really take that in, and life just went on. We should have had a national day of mourning for those children, because it was very pivotal in how we then need to address our public, systems, our service delivery, because it is a government school. It's a government-aided school. And so every time I look back through, as I was doing that retrospect, that moment helped me realize what our education system could look like in the next few years, but then also the deterioration of our empathy and, our ability to stop and look deeper into the intricate things that happen in this nation.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that stood out for me.
Absolutely. Martin.
Moses.
Sorry, Moses. My apologies. Moses.
Thank you.
Yes.
To the viewers, of course, I'm happy to be here. What stood out for me this particular year was the mere fact that as a globe, just when we are trying to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic, then boom, Ebola comes in. So to me, I think that that particular health crisis stood out for me. But I am more than happy that our health sector, with all its challenges notwithstanding, has managed to deal with that particular health crisis. And as we speak, I think that the Ebola cases are not any more new cases, but also even the old ones have been dealt with very decisively. But secondly, the unfortunate part of the rate at which our insecurity dropped as a country, where we saw instances of police posts being attacked by unknown gunmen. I think to me that speaks greatly to the social contract theory. Has government lost grip of its capacity to protect Ugandans? So to me, those two incidents stood out for me, and one is fortunate, the other is unfortunate. So to me, that is it for now.
Absolutely. Yes, Martin.
Thank you. A number of things stood out for me, and specifically in Uganda, it's just about 3 weeks ago, the Constitutional Court outlawed or repealed certain offenses, among them this offense that has always been used called rogue and vagabond, where many underprivileged people, people without jobs and all that, have been victimized and in the past and arrested, harassed, locked up for a very long time. So the Constitutional Court said, such an offense is unconstitutional, and it went on to give a number of reasons why. So for me, that stood out. At least I'm seeing progression when it comes to our court. I hope also other petitions that are being filed, like the previous on yes, also the one of Businje Kabumba, where the judges said, acting judges, to make people acting judges is illegal. And also FIDA has filed a case where they seek to recognize cohabiting couples. I hope that it also goes in the progressive way it needs to go. The other thing that stood out for me was the fact that in COP27 this year, there was a recognition of damage done to the least developed countries, and they're setting up a fund to compensate, for the loss that developing countries or least developed economies have suffered due to the actions that have endangered the climate, mainly from the global north. That has stood out for me, and also many other things. Jacob Zuma surviving, Ramaphosa surviving impeachment, and then the whole drama in UK politics. So it has been quite an eventful year, and it was quite interesting for me.
Absolutely, very eventful year. I think for me, it cuts across the globe, really. There's been event after event in almost every corner of the globe, and it all speaks to a whole shift. I think I've not really put my fingers on what shift that is, but there's a geopolitical, economic, name it, everything in there, a shift globally. And you cannot just point to Africa, you cannot point to Europe, you cannot point to America. There's been a lot going on, and for me, sorry, it is a cocktail. It is a fantastic word for it. But anyway, to bring it back here to Uganda, to some of the issues, some of the events that really, made sense or really affected us as a country. We would want, for me, let us start from where we lost the Speaker of Parliament, the late Jacob Oulanyah. That was the beginning. It was actually at the beginning of a lot of things. I remember that was about March 2022, and it was such a shock because he'd just taken office, and we were looking forward to, what he had to offer. And so when I look back at him as a man he had three principles he ran by, and he said, I have three principles. Is it okay with God? Is it okay with the law? When I take that decision, will I sleep well? I mean, let us start from there. He died prematurely. We didn't expect that to happen. And then we see a shift again in our politics, a shift from a person we had a lot of hope in. And then we're like, okay, so what next? What happens next? I want to begin with you, Moses. When that happened, when we lost the speaker, and then we had to go through another election for the speaker, what came to your mind?
First and foremost, I have to agree with the way you described the speaker, the late Right Honourable Speaker, a man of values. I was lucky and privileged to meet the late Jacob personally, but you could see a man who had a strong conviction for patriotism and service towards this country. And I think his death was and still remains a big loss to us as a country. And I hope that eventually that vacuum that he has left behind can be filled. But speaking to the personality, but also to the institution of Parliament, above which he was presiding, he had offered a new face to this institution.
That's true.
Because when he came, I recall his landmark speech when he said that, this Parliament isn't about me, and we have to take decisions as a whole. We must deviate from saying, I am doing this, I am correct, but are we doing this from a consultative point of view? Is it a consortium of ideas? So his notion of let's do this together, to me, that stood very tall for me, because we know that with unity comes so many things. But interestingly is that also this incident cast our legal regime in I don't say in bad light, but it showed certain loopholes that we have in our legal framework, because the law clearly provided that, you know, the new speaker shall be elected before the burial of a sitting speaker who had died.
Yeah.
Now that sort of contradicted with the African traditional norms and culture, which believes that, you know what, you cannot feast or you cannot dance over a dead body.
Yeah.
So to me, I saw a conflict between culture and the law, but also it showed that maybe we have so many provisions in the law that have not yet been put into force and have not been tried out. But above all, I think that it was a big loss to us as a country, but also to the institution of Parliament, which is the people's institution, which is supposed to be the body where every Ugandan looks forward to say that this is our body, it is for us. But, well, we continue to have hope in the new leadership, and we hope that they can fill the gap that the late Jacob left. But I know it won't be very simple.
Talking about it being an hard, Gloria, from the time the Right Honourable Jacob Oulanyah died, we transitioned into a new, you know, face of our parliament. What did we learn from that? The transition, first of all, and how does it look at the moment?
Yeah, I think the transition one was chaotic.
Yeah.
But it also reminded us that there's some things that won't be in our control in the moment. Because between having a funeral and then having the house have a head, it almost looked like it was a merry-go-round around his death. And I was really, really looking forward to a parliament under Jacob Oulanyah, because his politics was non-divisory. Like, I'm liberal to a point that we can make this work. Fast forward, I keep telling people I feel like the 11th parliament now is, you know, Mizigo Express Pro Max.
Thank you.
Because
wow.
Yes, because in between the debates and in between, you know, things past laissez-faire, you almost, you know, lose that touch. And because I've actually focused on the parliament, there are times you have conversations and you go like, did that really happen in the August House?
I know.
So you have that pause of Selah. Let me think and ponder about what just happened. And so in the transition, I think we've had 3 disciplinary committee cases happen in Parliament, twice for Honorable Zake, for instance. And I'm imagining, at what point did it become, you know, a beck and call for discipline only? We are barely having work being done. And if it's work being done, then it's even being done shoddily. And on a constant, I imagine what that house would have been under Jacob Oulanyah.
That's true.
You know, the level of sanity that comes with his wisdom. And he was an intelligent man. And so losing him and then coming into this transition, it almost feels like we've given leeway. It's like, let them do what they have to do and get out of this house. And then we'll have a little bit of more sanity in the next house. But unfortunately, if we trace the success of the 11th Parliament today, we would have more failures count for the time they've lived in that house.
Sadly.
Absolutely.
Martin, from what Gloria said and Moses, it's very important to note that we were all looking forward to it, because he was telling us that he was looking to a more, you know, interesting debate, you know, a very involved parliament. At the moment, Gloria here highlights already what has happened with our parliament. The 11th parliament is by far the most ridiculed parliament out of its precincts. Are we regretting? Did we lose somebody that we might never recover in any of the people that replaced him or in the parliament itself?
Yeah, thank you. I must confess I was not a big admirer of Jacob within the NRM.
True.
That the fact that he belonged to this party that is quite without an agenda and everything. But him as a person, he had good qualities, honestly. And among the qualities that I appreciated about him was the fact that he believed in separation of powers, you know. And I remember the speech, must have been 2011 when he was elected deputy speaker, or 2016, I don't remember, so to be exact. But one of those speeches, he gave a speech and was quoted Dicey, and he was also quoting some British scholars, and he said that one of those quotes that he admired so much is the fact that Parliament can make everything except maybe make a human being. So that's how much he believed in the separation of powers, but also the institution of Parliament, the fact that Parliament is capable of checking the other institutions.
Yes, yes.
So his demise was a big blow to our constitutional order. It was a big blow to democracy in Uganda. And what followed was, in fact, immediately after his death, in my view, the constitution was also misinterpreted, because there was a big debate on vacancy. When does the speakership or when does the office of the speaker fall vacant? In my view, office of the speaker falls vacant when there is no person, neither the deputy nor the speaker. Then when we had a deputy speaker who could essentially preside over even the paying tribute and all that, we still ignored that and rushed into interpreting it, thinking that office of the speaker falling vacant is when the head, that is the is off. Yet speakership is actually like an office. So we got it wrong, and I think the Attorney General also got it wrong in that advisory. But because the emotions were high, I mean, a lot was happening. There was no sobering moment to sit down and say, look, what are we doing? Can we interpret? I also doubt if we had gone to the Constitutional Court for interpretation, they would have arrived to a different interpretation. Because the Chief Justice was all over the place with this issue, making ridiculous statements. So that was an unfortunate incident. But again, what has followed after his demise, the speaker that followed, has become a bit of a problem to us taxpayers and the problem to democracy. She's running the house like a kindergarten, not even a kindergarten, like a primary school. Everyone who has an issue with her is sent to the disciplinary committee. Parliament has become a police of morals rather than actually a legislative body. So
it's not even a police, I think, of morals. I think it's more like a theater where there's somebody controlling the
and I'm right to say it's Mizigo Express.
Absolutely. I mean, people are quarreling with in a democracy. Some things can pass, you know, like focus on the issues, focus on the contents. This one has abused this one is saying Parliament is full of thieves.
Like a classroom.
Like a classroom. So they are quarreling over. And I'm disappointed that senior legislators like Abdu Katuntu are the ones who are surrogating this. They're the surrogates of this mess. You know, he should have learned, but I see him conducting disciplinary, you know, committees, becoming the head prefect, and it's unfortunate for a seasoned lawyer to be turned into a head boy.
Anyway,
you know?
Talking of leaders and politics and the drama, because 2022, I'm telling you, has been lots of drama. Now, away from what happened around that, we had the Kenya elections.
Oh, yeah.
Now, the Kenya elections were also another dramatic scene, albeit without violence. Of course, it was very fantastic that there was no violence, but there was an interesting element of some sort of you know, we kind of saw something interesting come out of Kenya. Yeah. We saw a shift from dynasties into now what they call hustlers. Yes. It was a very interesting move. And Moses, what did you pick from that? It seemed like a shift. Like I keep saying, this whole year was about shifts in every corner. It was a shift and it was unexpected. Do you see a different Kenya and hustlers? And are they missing out on the dynasties?
Well, firstly, I followed the Kenyan election very closely. And I was an ardent supporter of President William Ruto. And the whole hustler narrative, how it took shape and how it swept Kenyans off their feet. To me, it was a great happening, in my own words. But to me, most importantly, is the post-election, how the two camps handled the results of this election.
Yes.
If it were any other country, and I don't want to mention names, but if it were any other country, the level of insults, the level of discontent, the level of how leaders would have expressed their dissatisfaction, perhaps would have been much more different.
Yeah.
And to me, that running into the Supreme Court decision, of course led by Martha Koome, and the way the issues were handled before the Supreme Court, to me, that demonstrated the independence of institutions in Kenya. And to me, it forced me to think that Kenya borrowed so many principles from our 1995 constitution, but how they've managed to implement it to the dot, to me, still is a point that Ugandans must reflect on. But William Ruto has come with so much hope. But it is so soon for us to begin seeing things like the suspension of the 4 commissioners of the IEBC who were suspended on allegations of gross misconduct. I think that for a country that is trying to heal from a very contentious election that I would say did divide the country into two, there should be national reconciliation. There should be truth-telling. But for us to begin to see 4 commissioners being suspended and they're now about to face, I think, the Commission of Inquiry, to me, that is not a country that is trying to heal. I think that William Ruto is up to task, and Kenya being a beacon of democracy in the region, we are looking to them so much. And the way William Ruto will run his administration will set precedent for the region entirely. But largely, I think Kenyans have so much hope in him, and the region entirely have so much hope, because you know the Hustler Fund has been established, and Kenyans can now access money through the Hustler Fund. So I think that so many of these promises that he did promise, he's actually actualizing them. I just hope that they can rise above the petty politics, that they can move away from, you know, I am a Kikuyu, I am a Luo, I am a Kalenjin. If they can rise above that kind of politics, I think Kenya under democracy is headed for great times.
Interesting. Gloria, William Ruto came in as a hope for many Kenyans. And in fact, commentators were saying it is a turning point in their electoral history, saying that for the first time, the presidential election scrambled the usual political map organized around ethnicity. But also the issue of a negotiated democracy was also seen. We saw how we had pro-Ruto people, pro-Raila people, but there was a whole concerted, different groups coming together to support that concerted, you know, democracy coming together. But again, do we learn anything as Ugandans from that?
Oh yeah, we do. And we do, because I think within the East African region, Uganda and Rwanda have the longest serving presidents.
Yeah.
And it's very important for us, or even for Kenya, to be, you know, standing in a political space where we can have some lessons. And I kept telling people it really mattered for us that we saw through the Kenyan election. It was a precedent for us as East African region, because, you know, democracies need to have presidents that not just only bow out, but also have elections that are and seem to be free and fair. And fast forward, because we had come for an election in 2021 that had a whole internet shut down. And then post-election, we had, you know, military.
Even before.
Yes. But post-election, we even had, you know, opposition camps where military was at their entities. And then we come to our 2022 election in Kenya. I feel like the Kenya election happened more for Uganda, and to realize that democracy is possible to be had, and it's possible to have a free and fair election. And so for the region, Kenya set a precedent. I mean, internet was on for them.
Yes.
They didn't have a shutdown. And in the past, I did a tracker for, you know, internet shutdowns within the Great Lakes region. And Kenya still stands, apart from the 2007, 2008, you know, incident. And post that, they had electoral reforms that helped them, you know, navigate such a dark season. It's been setting precedent after precedent in what their democracy looks like. But also, Baba, for a person who had come constantly, and in this instant had what they call quote unquote the deep state, had the support of the standing president, it was quite a narrative change for us, that even with all this solidarity and with all this support, it is possible for democracy to prevail.
Yes.
And even without, I noticed that the media had a big stake in this election as well, because at some point everyone was like, wherever you look, your fifth is winning. If you look on NTV Kenya, your fifth might be winning. If you look on KTV, you might have your your fifth is winning. Yes. So you be confident. Yeah. And so in such that tension that it built up, I was happy to see a precedent set for us to have a free and fair election, but then also to have a non-violent election, to also have entities of democracy upheld, have running internet, have a media presence. That was a precedent for the East African region.
The entire East African community.
Exactly.
Agreed. Now, Martin, I realized that in Kenya, despite the divisions, despite the different political affiliations, somehow there was some unity of sorts. Yeah. There was some, especially among the youth. Now, if you notice that most of the youth some of them refused to vote in some counties for reasons they had. But again, they were like, I think there's some hope in William Ruto. And now this came to us as an East African community, as Gloria has already hinted on it. But William Ruto is now taking a huge role. Fast forward, he's taking a huge role in leading the entire East African community into bridging a lot of gaps therein. Is he going to make any inroads in the East African community? Is he going to be as impactful as the picture looks like?
Thank you. I think he will be impactful given Kenya's position in the region, but on the continent. Kenya is, I think, the fifth or sixth biggest economy in Africa, and it's also one of those countries that have had actually stable transition, stable government for some time, but they are a hub for investment. Name it. Kenya is in a advantage kind of point, view or position where they can influence quite a lot, and you even see their trade. For example, Uganda, they are our biggest trade partner in the region, and they influence quite a lot. So I think there is going to be a lot of leadership, and I'm happy that William Ruto has recognized this and he's doing it. I had feared, given his close friendship with Mr. Museveni, I'd feared that it could be a disaster for East Africa, but he seems to be...
I mean, he's considered the godfather.
But when you have, they say birds of a feather, flock together, and given Museveni's bad track record when it comes to governance, when it comes to warmongering, I thought Kenya would... but then Ruto seems to be a clear-minded kind of leader, and I don't think he'll be influenced. I've seen his action on the environment. He has delivered. He's taking the lead in Africa when it comes to sustainability and tackling this issue of climate change. He's selling his agenda on renewable energy, clean energy. So I think Kenya, to that extent, is going to lead, and I'm optimistic. I really preferred Raila Odinga for very many reasons, but then democracy is democracy, and the people spoke, and they spoke loudly, and Ruto is also recognizing that and trying to work for everyone. We hope it continues that way, and it's not just political rhetoric, and it's not just excitement of just a few days in office. But importantly, before we leave this point, I want to pay tribute to Uhuru Kenyatta, who allowed transition to flow, who said, you know what, my time is up. I should give way, and he's now doing a lot of diplomatic work on the continent, uniting warring factions in Ethiopia, I think in Sudan, in DRC. He's doing an amazing job. I also want to pay tribute to Raila Odinga. If it wasn't for Raila Odinga, Kenya would not have the 2010 constitution. I think it is 2010.
2013.
2010.
2010, yes.
yes.
2010,
And
yes.
it, yeah, they would, and it's of course the first elections I think were 2013 under that same constitution. So
yes.
they wouldn't have that progressive kind of constitution
That's
if it
right.
hadn't been for that gentleman. So I would say he's the father of democracy in Kenya. The checks and balances, the independence of the judiciary, all these democratic parameters are largely,
and the independence of the IEBC.
Independence of the
well.
IEBC, they are largely because of him. And Kenya is very intentional about that.
Yes.
So many countries that say, oh my goodness, it takes time to be democratic, leave us to take our time. Look at Kenya. Kenya is being intentional and radically so. So we should also take a leaf.
Maybe
Lynn,
before you leave that, and I think, Martin, just to clarify, when we say tribute to Uhuru Kenyatta, we miss the fact that it is a term limit that have made it possible for the Kenyans to be able to have transition happen. And so when we have a debate on removal of term limits within the Kenyan constitution and the Kenyan parliament, we are worried. And so whereas we acknowledge that there was a precedent set, we need to also be very clear that the essence of term limits is like Uhuru wouldn't stand again.
Absolutely.
Simply because there was a cap that proves that transition should and must happen.
And I'm worried that conversation was had started.
Yes.
And then I'm glad that President William Ruto came forward to distance himself from it. Yes.
Just one quick comment regarding the Kenyan question is that personally, as we approach the Kenyan election, I was reading a book by Dambisa Moyo, and Dambisa Moyo argued that African states aren't ready for a multi-party dispensation, but what we need is a benevolent leader. So then when I compare that statement to how Kenya played out in its election, I think that Kenya proved Dambisa Moyo otherwise. But also, secondly, is the winner-take-all political system.
Okay.
And I saw that in the statement made by William Ruto, I think on his inauguration or a day before, where he said that I will not incorporate opposition into my government.
Yes.
It is good for you to oppose me because when you oppose, then I can do better. But also, that could have been put out in a political sense, but the undertone was that we're still under a winner-take-all political system, which to me discourages national consensus and nation building at large.
Yes, surely. You raise a very important one there. But again, William Ruto, for many people, he's thought to be a sober-minded leader and focused. Breath of fresh air indeed. We have a few minutes to take a break. We want to take a break, but before we can take a break, the year 2022 also saw us lose the longest-serving monarch in history of this world, and that is Queen Elizabeth II in UK. She died, and her death also set in motion a whole other story in the UK. But it had been happening. It had started. Of course, we were seeing what was happening with the premiership, the prime ministers, the chaos at Westminster. There was a whole lot going on, and then her death kind of was the climax of it all. And then now we are seeing a certain shift as well. So I want us to look at that as well. We see that, of course, she was the head of the Commonwealth, of which we are part of, and there were questions that what happens now, because she was such a pivotal leader. Moses, I think we have about a few minutes. We can start with you before we can take a break, and we look into Queen Elizabeth's death, but also vis-a-vis UK politics at the moment.
First and foremost, thank you, Lynn. I think that for a country that presided over colonial rule in Uganda, I don't think that we should even be... I don't say sympathizing, but we shouldn't give it so much time because it is like us celebrating our former people who presided over tyranny here in Uganda and Africa at large. So I think that to me, the death of the Queen did not mean much to me as a person because, well, she or UK is the head of the Commonwealth, but what does the Commonwealth mean to us anyway? You see? So I think that we must begin to shift our discussion from the UK consensus from the Washington consensus and build a Kampala consensus. Because when you speak about the Commonwealth, that is all the West world is consensus. When you speak about things around for example, China and its influence in Africa. That is the Beijing consensus. So I think that we must begin to debunk our thoughts.
Have we shifted away, first of all, from the England or London consensus?
No. But the mere fact that the death of the Queen caused so much conversation within Africa, and we saw African leaders actually struggling to go and attend her funeral service. I don't know how many African leaders die year in, year out. Great African leaders. But you never see, even from within Africa, leaders struggling to go and pay tribute. All right? Yeah.
And ride on
Nelson is the exception to that.
Mandela was one of a few.
Yeah.
All right? But when African leaders, great African leaders, Mwalimu Julius Nyerere, just not so long ago, but he was buried and no one paid attention to him. These are guys who have made tremendous contribution towards African unity, towards where Africa is today. But the way African leaders flogged and tried to find their way to London to attend this particular burial, to me, only spoke to the fact that we are in a great area of neocolonialism, and that we must begin to divorce ourselves from that conversation of perceiving the West as a dominant force. Yes, they could be, as it stands, but I think it takes time and effort for us to begin to say that, okay, it starts by us not even paying attention to whatever is happening there, all right? Then we can focus more, because our conversations are outward looking. And not inward looking. We pay so much focus to what happens in the UK, but how about what is happening here in Uganda? So I think that to me, the death of the Queen did not mean much to me as a person, but interestingly is how history repeats itself. Because you know that the Queen, or Queen Elizabeth, the late rather, was not the legitimate heir to the throne. She took over because her elder brother did not have interest and blah, blah, blah.
The uncle.
Yes, the uncle rather. But interestingly is how also it's playing out with the princes. I think Prince Charles and Prince
William and Harry.
Yeah. So to me, interestingly how history, because even what's his name? The current king?
Charles.
King Charles III.
If you're to go into lineage, his mother and himself are not legitimate heirs to the throne. So
you're looking to illegitimize them.
Yes. So and interestingly, how the guy who married Meghan, the way I think he was also part of the lineage.
Yes.
And the way he chose love over the crown, to me, I think also is very interesting. So history is somehow repeating itself.
Absolutely. If we have a minute or so, Gloria, I would like to pick your... you could pick from
and
that.
I think I'm not so far away from your sentiments, but I'll beg to change. Because it's an oxymoron when we speak of our Pan-Africanism, and then have our colonial masters still have that kind of influence on us. And so we need to start, to change the narrative. I think I experienced, the death of the Queen through Black Twitter and Scottish Twitter. And it was a question of, now that she's gone, can we also have our reparations? Exactly.
Yes.
Can we have our reparations? And that is a conversation we need to honestly have.
Absolutely.
Is that beyond our colonial masters and beyond the narrative of the Commonwealth, we need to have reparations. We need to have things that belong to Africa be brought back. But then also as an entity, beyond UK, we need to also look at why we still have, US Africa summits, why we still have the Asian African summits. We need to find ways of, bringing these conversations home. And unfortunately, Africa doesn't go as an entity. You go as single president.
Yes.
So we do not even have the African agenda when we have these conversations with our colonial masters. And so even if we were to talk about the bigger picture of economies, of growth and development, of partnership, it is still at the beck and call of the other entities.
Absolutely.
And so the death of the Queen was just a revisitation of the conversation of having reparations and bringing back the stolen gold and goods from Africa. Please, we want our things
and
back.
Also reminding ourselves that we are African and we need to be respected as such. So let's take a break. When we return, I want to pick Martin's mind on the issue of the UK politics, because we saw it was a big year for UK because we saw a lot happening at Downing Street and how many prime ministers have come in and left. Yes, we want to get into that. Let's take a break. When we return, so much more on what happened in the year 2022. I'm glad you're still watching Civic Space TV. My name is Lynn Komugisha. I host the Diaspora Show, but today we have a very fantastic discussion. We're looking back at 2022, the year that was. A year that was very dramatic, a year that was very interesting, a year that was very disturbing because there was a lot of action. And I don't know what 2023 is going to look like, but here we are looking back at 2022. And with me is Kidega Moses. Kidega Moses hosts the Youth Roundtable and, of course, the Citizen Chat Show. Musiime Martin hosts the Community Show and Focus on Parliament, as well as Gloria Nabaye Women's Show and Focus on Parliament here on Civic Space TV. Now, earlier on, we took a look at the death of Oulanyah and the transition into a new speaker of our parliament. Then we looked at the Kenya elections and how it is playing out, and of course the role that Kenya is perhaps going to play in the East African community. We are looking at the UK politics just before we took a break, and I want to pick Martin's mind here. Martin, they're saying that in the UK, 2022 was a big year for leaving parties in London's Downing Street, with 2 prime ministers and 3 chancellors sent packing. And somebody says that the UK needs a reset. I mean, what more reset do they need after Brexit?
Thank you. I want to first pick what Moses was saying about the Queen and all that. I agree that there's a lot that the United Kingdom should be apologizing for. Yeah. Not only apologizing, but indemnifying for. At the center of justice is truth-telling.
Yes.
They must recognize the evil that they have done.
Is it karma at play?
No. If it were karma, I think given the atrocities they occasioned, they would be really doing badly. But karma is rare, you know. But they need to, the British government and the monarchy has to recognize the wrongs that have been done, you know, and many other imperial countries, Spain, Belgium, name it, even the contemporary US, you know, they should recognize the evils they have done and pay for those evils, compensate the people they have wronged. I mean, Kenya suffered under the Mau Mau at the expense of the British, you know. In many other colonies, the British really occasioned a reign of terror. So Queen Elizabeth, whereas recognized that some things were not done right, but she didn't take further steps into saying that, you know what, we are to blame and this should be done. So there should be indemnification, compensation of those wrongs, and there should be recognition that indeed this has happened. Germany is trying to do it for Namibia, but there's still much more to do. These economies are what they are because of the plunder, you know, in many of their colonies. Going to the UK politics, well, it's also interesting, and we talk about this because we are in a global world where things that happen in the UK affect us in one way or the other, you know, and that's why I will not fault my brother Moses so much for saying we need to focus on Africa so much, yet he also watches Premier League. So I'll not fault you because we're in a global world anyway. So I'll forgive you for that. But yeah, to see that there is a smooth transition of power, whichever way in the UK, that you can today wake up with let's say today it's Sunak now, and close the day when Sunak is out, and the following day it's maybe another person, you know,
right?
And then the country continues. Yes, the economy stumbles here and there, but it continues. So that guarantee that there's continuity of the state, in my view, is something to think about and to pick out as a positive thing. But also, we can't forget that the Brexit did isolated a bit of the UK. It didn't give them much leverage like they still had. They expected. And many things have gone wrong. I actually now doubt the legitimacy of the Conservative Party, considering that they've not had elections in a while.
Yeah.
But then the person that led them into these elections is no longer the prime minister.
Yes.
We still have many people who are discontented with the Brexit. So I don't know if the Conservative Party now went into an election, they would win. So there is the legitimacy of the current Conservative government.
Yes.
And also the Brexit question is still lingering, considering that the other, is it Ireland and North Ireland? There's still very many issues to do with that.
Scotland wants out.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Scotland also wants to go out, and
so
Scotland didn't agree so much when it was Brexit. So it's been a dramatic event, but what for me is the takeaway is the fact that the state still run, but also they disagree on issues. When Liz Truss came in, it was so much about the economy, the expenditure on this, the tax on that, the subsidies, name it, and then it led to the markets almost collapsing, and then she was like, you know what, I can't have it anymore. Let another person come in, and then as we are there, the chancellor tries to stabilize the economy. So it's on issues still, dramatic change, but they still have the basics, and they are still democratic, at least according to the way we see democracy.
And currently, they're under Indian rule.
and there's hope. And there's actually hope that he might lead them into a possible election, if that can happen. That is also, but somebody was saying that they have literally gone Game of Thrones on us.
Exactly.
Literally. We just watched movies of Game of Thrones, but now they have gone literally Game of Thrones on us.
But also, anyway, to add, we recognize that actually the UK's system is a bit unique because
yet we
Parliament,
copy from them.
we copy from them. Parliament has the biggest say. I must say, it's like the Parliament that leads in essence, much as they have the Prime Minister. So the Parliament is stronger. Once the Parliament wants you out, you are out, and the Prime Minister is answerable to the Parliament.
Absolutely.
So that's what makes it unique.
One thing before we leave this particular topic is that, to me, the level with which Africans were portraying Liz Truss and Boris for having resigned and portraying them as a sort of angels, whereas trying to say that in Africa this is a far-fetched idea. But then we forget that Thabo Mbeki actually resigned. As leader.
He was exception to the rule. There was a reason why. There was a reason why, and he was literally unheard of.
Okay, then how about the one who came after him?
The same story.
They're all ANC forces.
If ANC, if you have noticed what happens with ANC, most of its leaders are either cornered in a way, and eventually they resign. Eventually they leave those offices.
Yeah, but you see,
but South Africa is a democracy. It's not any ordinary African country.
Even with Liz Truss, there are certain factors that propelled her, or that forced her, if you may wish to use that word, to eventually throw the white towel in the ring. But to me, the point is that we are so quick to forget the role of African great leaders and African great individuals, and we are so quick to credit those who do things outside the African continent.
But let's agree, it's not an African thing to resign.
No, but what I'm saying is that what the Borises and the Trusses are doing is not new to Africa. African leaders have actually resigned
forced to resign.
Whether forced or not, because there are those who cling to power. They're there. There are those who cling to power. Even when there are burning issues, they insist and say, no, I'm in charge and I shall continue. So to me, I think that we must begin to, I don't know, this whole Pan-African idea, we must be able to, I agree that the whole Pan-African idea, right now as it stands, is still too elite, all right? People must begin to walk and feel Pan-African. I agree that you cannot say we are Pan-African when our national development is funded by the West and all that. But just as we conclude this whole UK Prime Minister issue, is that, to me also, importantly, is how I don't know. I hope Sunak will survive the silent racial tendencies that still exist in the UK. Right now, they're portraying him as, oh, you know what, the UK is actually is more liberal and all that. But I fear for him. He could be a victim in the near future. And to me, I think the UK they're on the spotlight right now. And how Sunak shall run his administration shall say a lot about the UK.
About
But also he's a very rich man, so he doesn't fit
So
any
as of now, UK is an Indian colony.
no. Well, true, but
views are has.
those are her views, certainly. But again, you raised very interesting ideas
Indeed.
there, Moses. But we need to move away from that. Still talking about global shocks that hit, of course, 2022. We saw the Russia-Ukraine war, and that had I don't even want to call it a ripple effect. It had, I don't know what, if I'm yet to find the word, because globally we have felt the shocks that war has caused. And now if we could take a look back at the Russia-Ukraine war, we have seen it go on for days, for months. I don't know where it is right now, if there's any future for it at this moment. The world is worried. We have been hit by food insecurity, especially Africa, because we've been relying on Ukraine for some grain into the continent, but also the economy. Look at how it has affected our economy. I want to begin with you, Martin. The Russia-Ukraine war, really, the bully here being Russia and Ukraine being the victim, but taking the world with it.
Yeah.
I mean, we ought to do better as a world.
Yeah, it's an economic catastrophe. It's a democratic catastrophe. It's also an existential catastrophe. Like, it goes at the core of our existence, you know. And first, of course, I'll handle the economic factor of it. That Ukraine and Russia, these two countries, are the biggest producers of grain, you know, wheat, and also cooking oil, but also
Fuel.
Yes, fuel. You know, they produce too much a lot of fuel and
gas.
Especially
and
Russia.
gas, exactly. So with that war, we saw gas prices hike, you know, in Europe, and fuel prices also hike in Africa, because many African countries also import fuel. In Uganda, it was even, of course, we were suffering before fuel, before the war had, I think, had risen so much, and they were giving excuses. COVID, you know, Ugandan systems are always excuses. COVID, truck drivers, etc., etc. Then the Ukrainian war came in. I mean, the Russian invasion of Ukraine comes in, and prices of fuel skyrocket. I think it reached 7,000
at some
liter,
point. Yes,
you know,
yes.
and that is so much. 7,000 is those are almost $2 or €2 per liter, and that's quite a lot. So we suffered, and then the food crisis. North Africa relies so much on the grain from Ukraine.
North and East.
Yes, North and East. A lot of grain, because they eat bread. Ethiopia also, name it, and this was cut. So the prices, you know, and all that, and it affected in Europe. Prices were so high, and when they're high in Europe, it also becomes a problem. Although towards a month ago, 2 months ago, the shilling seemed to be doing stronger, but it was because the euro and the pounds were falling because of the war. So and when those ones fall, still there are very many issues on the international market, you know, prices and all that flip, and it becomes a danger. So economically, it has been a disaster, and we hope it ends soon, and you know, that people get back to their normal lives.
Right.
We commiserate with people in Europe who are going through winter with no heating and things like that. But then I want to go to the next point of democracy. I mean, we shouldn't have a country in 2020 invading another country. What the permanent representative of Kenya, Kenya now sits on the Security Council. What he said, gone are the days of conquest. As Africa, and he said, as Kenya, we know what conquest means, you know. So for Russia to invade Ukraine, it reminds us of those dark times that actually led to the the creation of the UN, that we shouldn't have be another power invading another, trying to conquer another. That is what happened. The World War was caused like that when Hitler tried to invade Poland.
That's right.
So what does this mean for weaker countries when Russia is setting such a precedence, you know, that weaker countries will be attacked and then there will almost be no consequences. So it's honestly a fear for many of us smaller countries, but we hail the world democracies, world powers for standing up and showing solidarity, solidarity with the weak people, with the weaker nation that Ukraine is. And I hope African leaders stop this ridiculous excuses of non-alignment. We have two issues here. We have the oppressor and we have the oppressed. We have the invader and the conqueror and the conquered. So you cannot say we are being neutral on the issue where the existence of an entire nation is at risk. So Uganda, to say they are not non-aligned, it's hypocritical. As a country that was colonized, they should stand with the people of Ukraine who are facing erasure from Ukraine, from Russia rather.
Absolutely. Gloria, this was a global shock in its own way. We had others, yes, but this was a major global shock, Russia invading Ukraine. And then it hits us, the economy, the Ghanaian economy went into some bit of issues. There was hope though, but we still were recovering from COVID-19. And as it stands right now, we do not know the future of our economy. It is still shaky and worrisome. But there was blame, if you remember, our president came to address this and said it is a global problem. But I think we equally have a problem as a country. What would that be? And relating it to the global economy, where are we headed 2023?
I think two things. One, we cannot pass our eyes on the fact that COVID-19 had an impact on our economy. I mean, the economy was shut for a while, and recovery as such from a 2-year pandemic is tasking on any country. If we would give the example of Sri Lanka, they went bankrupt.
Yes.
And then two, internally, it was a question of how frugal then can we be if we are going to pass a budget of trillions. How are we going to manage and work with that kind of budget? But even post-budget reading, we had supplementary budgets. And I think recently the permanent secretary of Ministry of Finance was saying that he has a particular desk in his office for supplementary budgets, and it is full. And so in question of the reality of the economy is recovering from a pandemic, we needed to be frugal in that moment.
That's right.
But we cannot also disqualify the impact of the Russia-Ukraine invasion because, and rightly so, I mean, wheat comes from that region, gas comes from that region, and geopolitically we are now in an epoch where the shocks that happen in the West will definitely have an impact on us internally. And such a reality helps us, you know, other factors held constant, helps us understand how then do we recover. I think the question was on how then do we recover that we felt, because we knew when last the rain beat us. It was at the pandemic point. And so post-pandemic, we needed to be able to have recovery stops that help us navigate the times. And with the World Bank and the IMF letting us know that the crisis is on for another 5 or 2 years, it was very imperative for us to then plan differently. How do we reduce on government expenditure? But then how do we increase our tax base? And critically, how do we have a governor, you know, stand at the helm? Because I think one of the things that we forgot is that we even don't have a governor as of such. And so our economy is on, I don't want to say vibes and inshallah, but autopilot, for lack of a better word, we're on autopilot. And we keep going almost as though we are waiting for this train to crash. So critical is that we need to have recovery stops even now. How do we have government either supplement or, you know, cushion the Ugandans? We felt the fuel price crunch, while other economies felt like they could cushion and provide supplementaries and subsidize part of the fuel with their countries. Ours let us feel the crunch. So we went through the crisis full throttle. There was no, there was no tax exemption. There was nothing. And in such, we cannot, rely on Ugandans' resilience to keep going and have the economy run. But also critical on the Ukraine-Russia crisis is the role the international community has played in making it, easy to highlight, where the help needs to go.
Absolutely.
I think and I don't know when they'll stop,
Yeah.
but post-war era, I have a feeling Ukraine will have a better recovery than the DRC will ever have. And yet the DRC has the longest standing foreign mission.
Yeah.
MONUSCO has been there for a while. And so those, narratives of how, intervention happens for Ukraine and Russia and how intervention is happening for the DRC also are important in us understanding how the geopolitics works and how, nations have interests in different areas. And so part of understanding the Ukraine-Russia will help us also understand how to deal with the DRC Congo crisis, because it also affects our economy in as such.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that is where we are now.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Moses, picking from where Gloria has ended, it looks like 2023, if we do not address the issues that we faced during the 2022 year, especially issues to do with our economies and preparations to deal with the shocks, and instead just, gamble around and say, this has happened. Oh, we have an emergency, something. We can deal with this. Not a lasting solution. Going into 2023, are we able to withstand? Are we ready to withstand what these shocks have left behind?
Thank you, Lynn. Let me just comment about the Russia-Ukraine issue first.
Yes, absolutely.
I think that what is stopping us from having a third world war is the mere fact that there is a nuclear weapon, one pointing Moscow from Washington, then the other pointing Washington from Moscow. So the conflict between these two powerful, I don't want to say hegemonies, but these two world powers, Ukraine is only a playing field.
Yes.
And the famous statement of when the elephants fight, the grass suffers. Because if you look at the whole NATO invasion, how NATO took its bases very close to Ukraine, it is more than meets the eye, and we shouldn't evaluate this prima facie.
Right.
But most importantly is that how media has played a role in this Russia-Ukraine crisis. I am one of those who thinks that Russia hasn't done, whereas human rights are fundamental, and if you go back to the Magna Carta, the opening statements of all man is born equal, the issues of human rights notwithstanding, I think that media has portrayed Russia beyond what it has actually done. I think that the West, and in this I mean America, has mastered the art of how to use, because these days war is won by media even before you get to the actual fighting.
Yes, yes.
So USA has managed to play out the media war very well, and the whole world is now against Russia. But if you're to understand deeply this war, well, Russia has invaded, true, but not as bad as it is portrayed. Secondly,
it should never have gone in the first place.
Secondly, is that to understand what Russia is doing now, you must go back to its founding father, Stalin, who is or was the father of communism. Okay? And up to today, Stalin's body has been reserved at Kremlin.
But we ought to move away from the past. We cannot be governed by the past.
My point is that Russia still believes that the Soviet Union must be rejuvenated. Russia still believes that, they can regain the USSR. All right?
Especially with Putin at the leadership of it.
So for us to evaluate how far this war is going to go, or how far Putin is willing to go, is to appreciate that Russia still believes that Ukraine and Poland, blah, 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 must come back to the USSR. But that aside, how does this translate to our economies as Africa? I think this was a big indictment on Africa, because we boast about having, I think, 40% of the world's arable land. And when a crisis happens on the other side of the globe, then we don't have food down here. So to me, then that was very disturbing, because if we say we hold the world is 40% arable land, then how are we not able to produce food that we need? Uganda itself, boasts of saying that we have excess supplies. So if you have reached a level of having excess supplies, then how does a crisis like that then cause us suffocation within? Because we saw food prices going high.
Yes.
So to me, that was a serious indictment on Africa, and we must review whether indeed we are taking advantage of our arable land, or is it a question of value addition that we are producing, yes, but our products don't meet certain global standards. So I think to me there are so many questions around our agricultural prowess as a continent. But lastly is that this war demonstrated to me the Bible story of David and Goliath. I think Russia went into this war thinking it was a walk in the park. To go there, run over Ukraine,
and get done with it.
Yes, but the resilience that Ukraine did portray, and the resistance that we have seen them, showcase, to me, I think goes back to the view that the world has moved away from, this whole hegemony, I am ABCD, and that we must begin to coexist. We must be able to see each other as equals.
Yes.
But the world also is a self-help system. We shouldn't forget that. That every country is on the world stage to negotiate for its own.
Absolutely.
And that is why when Africans continue to have soft pity of, oh, you know what, we were colonized and what, these guys should, pay us back. That is soft pity. Work on building the African continent. Do you know that the Igma Dam in DRC Congo, the ministers of finance of African countries met sometime and said that should they reignite or should they build the Igma Dam in Congo, it can supply electricity to the entire sub-Saharan Africa.
Imagine that.
All right? Now, that is the potential of Africa. But the questions around the conflict that continue to exist in DRC Congo, we have African leaders who have become comprado bourgeoisies, who are aiding the West in keeping the conflict in DRC Congo. So as I wrap this up, Africans must begin to become more inward-looking rather than outward-looking. Congo, to me, if Africa is a rifle, Congo is the trigger.
I like that you end on that note, because as we head into the conclusion of this whole conversation, the DR Congo question, comes forward. And we have seen that for the first time, the East African community is rallying its forces, is rallying, to make sure that they pacify, especially the East African, rather the Eastern DR Congo. And briefly, if we could briefly go into it, just briefly, Martin, we have already seen that William Ruto is taking the lead here in trying to help, but of course with the help of the rest of East African leaders. We have Uhuru Kenyatta at the fore of this whole peace negotiations. But are we likely to see a change? We have over 100 and so militia groups. Already we have ADF that have invaded Uganda just recently. I mean, is there going to be a time that Eastern DRC will be pacified and we have some sort of peace?
I honestly hope for that time. DRC is one country that each and every day I think about deeply, and it troubles me to see that such a rich country is going through this, it's like perpetual, it never ends, and it's sad. So I think that what will help DRC is not much war, but talking, negotiations. Negotiations take time. Negotiations require patience. Negotiations require compromise. So sending troops to Congo, sending more guns is not going to help per se. And there are leaders who are keen on that. Museveni is always keen on that. Kagame is always keen on that. And it shouldn't be. And I'm also seeing Kenya also being, keen on that. But then Kenya is not clear. It had
distanced itself, but now it is coming in.
Yes. I don't know. At times they are saying they are going in. Then at times they want to withdraw. So I think we shouldn't be so much sending guns to more
Congo, guns.
To more guns.
Yes.
That's going to lead that country into, if there are 100 militias, of course the fighting is going to continue. So there should be consensus, because many of these are partly regional, provinces, ethnic, many of these things can be talked about. There can be political compromises, you know, to that issue. Instead of fighting, fighting will cause more chaos, and it only benefits the oppressors, you know, that is the people who are exploiting the resources. People want the wars never to end, so that they continue using those loopholes to profit. So, but also importantly, leaders should back off Congo. You know, the leaders who have been reported to support militias in Congo, their countries, they should back off Congo. You know, they should stop supporting militias in Congo, because when they continue doing that, they're destabilizing that place further. In 2000, I think between 96 to 2002, Congo experienced something what we call Congo, the Second Great War of Congo, where it was like a world war of sorts, that there are around 13 countries that were involved, you know, Angola, name it, including, you know, even so somewhere the Israel state had sent support to, you know, one of the, like, very many states were involved. We shouldn't have that in a country which has it's the third, it is among the 3 countries with the biggest forest cover in the world. You know, it's part of
it's highly
mineral
rich.
is very highly rich in the entire world when it comes to mineral. It has good weather. So whenever we extend fighting there, we are endangering the people there. We are endangering the resources.
We're missing out on the opportunities.
We're missing out on the opportunities. We are destabilizing the environment. So let people back off Congo. Let leaders, the leader of Uganda, the leader of Rwanda, Burundi, these ones are the ones who are usually known to cause war. They're always in Congo. And sadly, they always are doing this for, like he said, like Moses said, these are compradors, you know, they're doing it for their masters. So if they are truly Pan-African, let the interests of Congo take shape, not the interests of them and the people and their masters, the imperial masters that they serve.
Interesting.
Can I have to disagree with Martin on one bit? You see, when Martin says that leaders or countries must divorce themselves from the Congo crisis, he must then...
The leaders. He insisted on the leaders.
Military invasion. No. You could facilitate negotiation, but remove the guns
from
Congo.
Okay. Whatever the case is, for you to say that, you must then appreciate that, for example, the distance between Kinshasa and Goma, vis-a-vis the distance between Goma and Kigali, or Goma and Kampala, is actually, there's a big difference. So in an era of transnational terrorism, where you have the ADF, you have the Boko Harams, you have all these terror groups, you cannot say that Uganda cannot have interest in the happenings of DRC Congo. And if the solution requires us to take military action, because the people that you're facing are holding guns. So you want to negotiate with terrorists?
Defend your borders, facilitate negotiation in Congo.
No, but
because we've had war from the creation of Congo. It hasn't solved.
Gentlemen,
I need to hear from
and
Gloria.
I hear both of you, because when Martin speaks of don't use military invasion in dealing with the crisis in Congo, I could occasionally back it to the AU's desire that we silence the guns on the African continent by 2022. That has not happened because there is still fighting. And I hear you when you say they cannot divorce themselves from such a narrative, and rightly so, because we are now in the dispensation of the East African region. I mean, Congo joined; it's now the 7th country in the East African region.
Yes,
but also as a Great Lakes region, there is stake for us to make sure that there is peace in the Congo. And so to have our individual leaders in that place, whereas would be a noble and, and a welcome thing, the narrative is they have their own interests. Can we divorce interest from the war of making, Congo livable for the people of Congo? If we can do that, then perhaps we may be able to do what? To stop a 2+ decade war. Congo has over 21 peace deals. And I'm talking about peace, over 21 peace deals. Negotiated. And on record. And I have the data for it. But the narrative is, with all these peace deals, have we been able to have, peace in the Congo? No. And so we need to interrogate the deeper, the unseen details of why Congo will stay at war as long as Congo is that rich, as long as Congo has those minerals, as long as Congo has teak. And so when we interrogate those interests within the Congo, we also now interrogate the role of MONUSCO in keeping Congo in that war. Because why is it that that peace, entity has stayed there for over 20 years and seemingly there is still no peace in the Congo and in the Goma region? So whereas we would love to see a free Congo, I am very particular on understanding whose interests does the Congo hold.
Oh, there are quite a number.
Exactly.
You'll be shocked. I want us to conclude
I
on
haven't
that.
given my thoughts on Congo.
you
I was only...
You only... Okay, fine. I'm giving you... We have a few minutes.
joiner.
Yes. Yes, we need to wind up on this.
Yeah,
yes.
but my point is that because you mentioned the EAC standby forces.
Yeah.
Mine is a question of capacity. Because what comprises of this EAC standby force? Uganda, I think, has been stopped from deploying because of the conflict of interest. Some applies to Rwanda, some applies to Burundi. So what then is left?
Kenya,
South Sudan. I don't know if South Sudan has a national army.
Since
it has. They have about seven. They have said that they're sending about 750 thereabouts.
Yeah, but you see, question.
I know, right?
The question of the capacity of the EAC standby forces.
Yes.
Notwithstanding the conflict of interest that exists therein, because there are countries that will be both on the standby side, but also on the militia side. So how do you shoot at So no, I've not mentioned names. But to me, perhaps we need to go back to what Jakaya Kikwete said, that it took the big boys in the room to deal with M23 back then. And the big boys in this case was SADC, Angola, Mozambique, Tanzania, and other states. Because those ones, I think they are more independent-minded.
We thought MONUSCO would do that.
But you see, MONUSCO is part of the comprado. Their interests are also conflicting, all right?
Okay.
But just, to me, someone said that Congo is too rich to be left alone, and I have to agree with them. Because if you go back to how Patrice Lumumba was assassinated, then you look at how Mobutu came into power, then you look at the wealth that the Kabila family accumulated, you'll appreciate that the comprado bourgeoisie within the DRC Congo has actually played the biggest role in having Congo at conflict to where it is today.
Right.
But just lastly is the role of international bodies, and in this case, the UN and African Union and blah, blah, blah. First of all, the African Union cannot bite. I don't know why the African Union actually still exists in the first place. But the United Nations, they were so quick to convict Uganda for the role we played in, of course, planned and blah, blah, blah. But you know how the UN selectively chooses to convict and to indict African countries. To me, it is very appalling. Because you had imagined that with the role that Russia is playing in Ukraine, the UN would levy sanctions after sanctions. But they're quiet on that.
Absolutely.
But when an issue is happening here in Africa, they're quick to say that, oh, guys, you know what? Please do this. So to me, I think the issue of Congo is to me, my heartfelt thoughts to the women and young children who have become victims of war, who the refugee spillover in Uganda, and of course these other countries. I think that, I don't know what we shall do for Congo, but some have said that, can we just have our hands off Congo? I don't know. Maybe they can deal with their internal
divine
issues.
Intervention of sorts.
But it's complicated.
Anyway, we're running out of time, but we cannot conclude this conversation without this fantastic one. Now, allow me quote Timothy Karijira. He says, if news is events or developments that cause eyes to widen, heads to shake, or jaws to drop, then the biggest newsmaker of 2022 in Uganda, if not East Africa, was General Muhoozi Kainerugaba. And 2022 in Uganda could have been summed up in just 2 words: Muhoozi's tweets. Now, gentlemen and lady, in a minute for each of us, I want to begin with you, Moses. I'll start with you. The tweeting general. What are your thoughts about the 2022? Because literally, it was the tweeting general.
Yeah, to me, interestingly, because someone literally, because people have said that he has used these tweets to perhaps try to accumulate power. But I think if you look at the power brokers and the power layout in this country, I don't think General Muhoozi has attained his power because of the tweets that he puts out there. I think he's trying to legitimize his political aspirations as a person, of which he has every right to. He is a Ugandan. But my point of contention is that he is still a serving military officer. So you cannot make a bed and lay on it. If he wants to participate in this country's political dispensation, then play by the laws, play by the rules. Because, I mean, you know that if men were angels, then we would not need the law. But because men, by who we are, we have, you know, our hearts are sort of fictitious and we are selfish by nature. Therefore, we have what we call the law to really create a leveling ground for everyone. So I think that the tweeting general, he has every right to use his social media platform the way he wants, but he must distinguish between his tweets as a person and therefore not plunge the country into any sort of international or diplomatic crisis.
Absolutely.
But I think as a person, he is within every right to use his platform the way he wants, for as long as it is not outside the law. But also, he has rights to hold political aspirations for as long as still he does so within the law. But interestingly, his comments about the NRM, I find them very, very contradictory, because he says that the NRM is very reactionary and etc. But then he
being
praises,
the first son does not make him an NRM.
the chairperson of the NRM.
He doesn't have to be.
So if the NRM is reactionary, but then you're praising the chairman and the founder of the party, then
you're contradicting yourself. Gloria, he tweeted us into an almost international, well, not international war of sorts when he talked about Kenya invading Kenya and all that. I mean, should we be paying attention to this gentleman?
I think we can't dismiss him.
Absolutely.
That's the one thing I've noticed. Because whereas his tweets are problematic and I've made it a stance of my own that I will not share that, one thing about his tweets is that you'll find truths, if not fallacies, to the realities of the things that he speaks about. With Kenya, I'm glad the Kenyans dealt with him. Yes. We would never have won that beat. But when he speaks of the NRM, there are truths and maybe we will need to interrogate as time goes by. Is the NRM reactionary? Are there intricacies that we need to dive into the NRM? I think for us, looking back on the by-elections where there were a lot of NRM, cadres that were pushed out, and even in the general election, it is very critical for us to understand the NRM of today. Is it as strong as it used to be?
Very strong.
Looking at it in the context of all the other political parties.
Yes.
But then also he comes at a point where we also understand the role of media and digital platforms in creating narratives and agendas. And so whatever he says, regardless of whether we take it with a grain of salt, it is important for us to interrogate. So if he's coming to stand for presidency, that is also important for us to note.
Yes.
Because it changes, the landscape of who then stands for presidency. I mean, then this is a serving military officer. Is he going to resign?
It's very easy for him to resign.
Who just got a promotion?
I know, right?
So is he going to resign and then join active politics? But then also, what does that speak to the dispensation of our politics? We've not had civilian presidents in a while. So it's important for us to have a lensing of these issues outside him as a person, but also what they speak to narratives and agenda setting for us as Ugandans.
Absolutely. Martin, as I end with you, Timothy Karejia goes on to say, the last time Uganda had witnessed this kind of drama was during the 8 years of Idi Amin, in which every few days or weeks produced startling statements by the president. Now, imagine we are assuming he has political ambitions, but he is giving out startling and almost starting a war with our neighbor. I mean, where are we headed?
Honestly, I feel so embarrassed whenever I read what this gentleman says. For context, Muhoozi Kainerugaba is the son to Uganda's longest-serving ruler of almost 40 years, General Yoweri Museveni. He was, until recently, until 3 months ago, he was the commander, land division, the third, highest position in the military. That means he's a high government official honestly, for all intents and purposes. And that means he makes military decisions that affect the stability of the country and the region. So for him to tweet that it would not take him a day to run over Nairobi, when he is the commander of land forces, is a statement that was actually calling for war.
Yes.
That is a statement that such statements rank in the categories of Idi Amin, Adolf Hitler, and such other conquerors or fascists. So he's a fascist to begin with. He's a fascist, and with all those other heavy terms that can be attributed to. This is a gentleman who recently supported Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
Yeah.
This is a person who took sides in Ethiopia, in the Ethiopian war.
Even in the Uhuru election.
Yeah.
He took sides, of course, in the Uhuru election. This is a gentleman who publicly has supported M23.
But also embarrassed his father.
And he has embarrassed his father, a rebel movement in Congo.
Yes.
And said that this is an ethnic group that should be respected, ethnicity. And he, like, it's crazy. So that's embarrassing. Many times his tweets have been forwarded to me by colleagues from other countries with whom we've met on different platforms. And I get embarrassed because I'm like, people are like, what is happening in Uganda? Then you have to defend your country, not him, but your country, to distance the country from the ridiculous statements that he makes. But importantly also to note is this leadership is so much about character. If he wants to be a president and all that, which I don't think he qualifies, considering that he's a serving officer, and for a serving officer you must tender in your resignation, and your resignation has to be approved, I think, by the High Command and the president.
Yeah.
And the president does it by his discretion. So it's not guaranteed that he's supposed to, and he's not even supposed to have those political views, because he's a serving or military officer. But his tweets they should tell us the kind of person he is and the kind of conversations they have in home, in their home, because like I said, leadership is so much about character. What you say, what you think about in the deep of the night reflects what you have been thinking about all your time. So M23 is not a new rebel group in Congo. And then he comes to support it. This shows the kind of conversations perhaps they've been having in their family, going on. Yes. When he talks about his family and says there is a God-forsaken whatever they introduced in their family. So it shows how they look at the people who are not part of their family, So General Muhoozi's tweets should not be looked at in an isolated manner, but they should be looked at in this in a broader context of the family that has ruled Uganda for over 40 years, what they think about issues. Because if you've been a first son for all these years, perhaps your thoughts would be different. He has gone to the best schools. By the fact that he puts out these statements like that, and there is literally no consequences, it shows us how his family thinks about Ethiopia, what the family thinks about M23, the Congo, what the family thinks about women, what the family thinks. Recently, he was even talking about conquering, I don't know, UK or something like that.
We need
so it's a broader conversation, and if Museveni does not stop his son, he's going to bring more problems to this country, and I fear for the worst.
Absolutely. How fantastic to end this interesting conversation. The year 2020 at a glance from us, from Moses Kidega here, and Musiime Martin, and of course Gloria and myself. It has been a wonderful conversation. I think we bring to the fore a lot of issues, and as we go into 2023, we are hopeful that lots of things might change, and hopefully we can rein in on the tweeting general. Sometimes you're like, oh my God, that is a Ugandan. And so you don't know what to do. Yeah, but again, also for the economy, we hope things can, work out and change. And hopefully we can have I am worried about 2023, honestly, but we're glad we had this conversation, and hopefully we can have more conversations to help, advance what our country, looks like, and how it can, be portrayed out there. I thank you very much, lady and gentlemen, for this time. And those of you who've been watching, keep watching Civic Space TV. This is where you'll find all the most interesting conversations. We'll catch you again next time. Do have yourselves a wonderful time, and God bless.